The airport was alive with motion heels clicking across tile floors, wheels of carry-ons rolling in sync, voices echoing from the intercom, and tension thick enough to slice through. Somewhere between the quiet waiting area and the polished gates of Gate 47, a storm was brewing, one no one expected, and certainly no one was ready for. Marcus Carter, just 8 years old, sat quietly in his window seat, holding a tattered book in one hand and a crumpled boarding pass in the other. He had just offered his first-class seat to a heavily pregnant woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. He didn't do it for applause or attention, just instinct. Raised by a mother who'd always told him, be the kind of man who lifts others up even when no one's watching. That was all it took. One soft smile from the woman, a whisper of God bless you, and she settled into the luxury seat as Marcus quietly moved toward the back of the plane. But this wasn't where the trouble started. Just 10 rows ahead, something entirely different was about to erupt. A man in his 50s, dressed in a smart navy blazer and clutching a black briefcase, was politely asking the flight attendant for assistance with his overhead bin. He had a calm voice, slightly raspy, and an accent that hinted at a southern upbringing, nothing aggressive, nothing disrespectful. Yet something about him seemed to rub the flight attendant the wrong way. She was tall, her uniform crisp, her tone sharp. Sir, I told you, the bin is full. You'll need to check that. At the gate? But there's clearly space in the next one if I could just... He tried again, before anyone could process what happened next. Her hand came down with a slap that echoed louder than the engine hum outside. The man stumbled slightly, more in shock than pain. Gasps rippled through the cabin like a wave. Phones came out. A toddler stopped crying. Even the pilots heard the uproar through the cockpit door. No one could believe it, not the passengers, not the crew, and certainly not Marcus, who had just buckled in and turned his head toward the sound. The passenger didn't retaliate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulled out a sleek black phone, and made one call. Calm, measured. It's happened. Activate protocol red. That's all he said. 60 seconds, that's how long it took before the airline's name was pulled from the upcoming flight displays at 9 major U.S. airports. 60 seconds, that's how long before air traffic controllers began receiving alerts. Scheduled flights were suddenly marked delayed indefinitely. Ground staff received orders to deny check-ins for that carrier, and several terminal gates began to empty in eerie silence. Passengers had no idea why. Gate agents looked confused. Managers started receiving calls from the top dot, and all because of one slap. Back on the plane, the captain was told to remain grounded until further notice. The flight attendant who threw the slap? She had turned ghost white. She looked down at the man now seated in business class, then back at her colleagues, then back again, as if realizing she hadn't just hit a regular passenger. The man now, coolly scrolling on his phone, didn't flinch. Marcus, still seated in economy, watched the dominoes fall. He didn't know it yet, but the woman he'd given his seat to? She held a connection to this mystery man, a connection that would later change the course of his own life. Just moments earlier, she had slipped a note into his hoodie pocket while boarding. He hadn't read it yet, but he would, and when he did, everything would change. Because this wasn't just about a slap dot, it was about power dot identity dot, and how one simple act of kindness could unravel a secret web of influence, vengeance, and justice that reached far beyond the airport walls. And the note, it wasn't a thank you dot, it was a warning, and Marcus was about to find out why. Marcus didn't even notice the note at first. He had slid deeper into his seat, adjusting the little plastic window shade halfway down, trying to block out the awkward tension that had settled over the plane. People were whispering, peeking over their seats. The flight attendant who slapped the man had disappeared to the galley, and the rest of the crew were walking on eggshells. No one dared say anything too loud. The man who had made the mysterious phone call hadn't moved since. His briefcase was back under the seat, and he scrolled casually through his phone like he was browsing the weather. Meanwhile, Marcus reached into the pocket of his hoodie, expecting to find a receipt or maybe the key card from the motel he stayed in last night. Instead, his fingers brushed against something folded paper, smooth and slightly warm, like it had been pressed in someone's hand for a while. He pulled it out slowly. The handwriting was rushed, but elegant. The ink smudged slightly at the edges, like she wrote it in a hurry. The words made his heart skip. "You're being watched. Don't trust the uniforms. Ask no questions. When we land, head straight to baggage claim. Someone will find you." He read it twice, then a third time. His fingers tightened on the paper. He glanced up toward the front of the plane, where the pregnant woman he had given his seat to now sat peacefully. Her eyes closed, hands resting on her belly like nothing was wrong. What was going on? Marcus wasn't some conspiracy type. He was just a regular teen from Baltimore trying to make his way to Atlanta for a summer internship. Something about cyber law and AI regulations, his guidance counselor had set it up through a nonprofit. It was supposed to be a new beginning, a chance to do something bigger than his neighborhood, where ambition often drowned in concrete and sirens dot, but now, sitting there on a plane that hadn't taken off and likely wouldn't for a while, everything suddenly felt bigger, heavier. The note burned in his hand. He glanced at the man who had been slapped. He didn't look back. Other passengers had started whispering again. A woman behind Marcus leaned forward and whispered, "Is that him? The guy who runs those private security firms?" "I swear I saw him on the news." "Can't be," her seatmate replied. "What would he be doing flying commercial?" Marcus kept his head down, but his ears sharpened. Security firms. What did that mean? At that moment, a soft ding came over the speakers, and one of the remaining attendants made an announcement. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremble she couldn't hide. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. Due to a minor delay with the flight manifest, we'll remain on the tarmac for a few more minutes. We ask that you stay seated with your seatbelts fastened." The captain didn't speak. That alone was strange. Usually they made jokes or gave updates, but now, silence, no engines. No movement. The man in the navy blazer finally stood up. "Not." Rush calm, deliberate, he turned to face the cabin. "My name is Aaron Strickland," he said, voice low but somehow carrying through the quiet. "Some of you may have seen what happened. I won't comment on it, but I will ask if anyone recorded the incident on their phone. Please preserve it. You may be contacted." Then he sat back down. Marcus stared. Aaron Strickland. That name echoed in his brain like a siren. He remembered something. A podcast he'd listened to while jogging around the park last month. "Modern Ghosts" was the episode title. It talked about powerful people behind the scenes, those who never showed up on Forbes but pulled strings anyway. One of the guests had mentioned Strickland, former intelligence officer turned defense contractor, rumored to have been involved in high-level negotiations in the Middle East, known for operating quietly and never forgiving disrespect. The slap now made sense, sort of, but why was a man like that flying coach? Why not private? Marcus looked back at the note in his hand. He looked at the woman again. She was awake now, watching him through half-lidded eyes. Their gazes met just for a second. Then she nodded once, so subtle no one else would have noticed. Like she was telling him, "Yes, you're in it now." He folded the note back into his hoodie and turned away. Meanwhile, out on the tarmac, chaos had begun to ripple through the airline's ground operations. In LAX, JFK, O'Hare, Dallas-Fort Worth, Atlanta, and 4 more airports, flights scheduled under the same airline were suddenly flagged for re-inspection. Every security checkpoint associated with them was overwhelmed. Baggage claim belts were shut down mid-rotation. Flight crews began receiving notices to report to a special holding area. Whispers among airport managers began to spread. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before, and it had all started 60 seconds after a slap. Back on the plane, Marcus felt something else shift. He couldn't describe it, but the air felt heavier. Like everyone knew something was happening, but no one wanted to admit it. The pregnant woman, he still didn't know her name, stood up and made her way toward the restroom. But halfway there, she stopped beside Strickland's seat. She placed her hand gently on the top of the seat in front of him and leaned down, whatever she whispered. Marcus couldn't hear it, but Aaron Strickland smiled, and for the first time since boarding, Marcus felt afraid, not terrified, just aware that he was surrounded by people who weren't who they claimed to be, people whose worlds operated on rules far beyond what he understood. And somehow they had pulled him into it. He wanted to ask questions. Why him? What did they want from him? Was it about the note? Was it about the seat? Was it something else entirely? But he remembered the warning, don't trust the uniforms. Ask no questions. He looked at the crew again. One of them, the tall male attendant near the exit row, was watching him, not casually. Not like a curious glance. Watching. Marcus shifted in his seat. He grabbed his bag from under the seat and hugged it closer. Then, for the first time since the plane had gone still, he noticed something even more disturbing. The seatback screen in front of him, the one that usually showed safety. Videos or flight maps? It had gone black. All of them had. The entire in-flight system was down. No music. No movies, no map. Dead silence. Just the low hum of something unseen building in the background. Marcus didn't know what was coming, but something was, and it was coming fast. Marcus kept his eyes forward, pretending to look out the window, but his mind was racing. Every second felt stretched, like the cabin was frozen in time. The blacked-out seatback screens, the silence from the cockpit, the strange note in his pocket. It didn't feel like a flight delay anymore. It felt like they were stuck in something much deeper. And for the first time, he realized this wasn't random. Somehow, he was a part of it, the man beside him in the middle seat. An older gentleman with wire-rimmed glasses and a brown leather jacket cleared his throat softly. You see what happened earlier? He asked without looking at Marcus. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah. That man, the older passenger whispered, tilting his head slightly toward the front where Aaron Strickland sat. I've seen him before, not in person, in hearings, defense briefings. If he's involved, it's already too late for someone? Marcus swallowed hard. What do you mean? But the man just smiled faintly and said, You'll see. Meanwhile, in the galley near the front of the plane, 2 flight attendants were whispering in hushed voices. The one who had slapped Strickland hadn't returned. Her absence was noticeable. Her name tag had read Monica, and she had been on edge since boarding. Now she was gone, vanished. No one saw her walk off the plane. She wasn't in the restroom. She wasn't in the cockpit. And the other crew members were clearly trying to pretend everything was normal. But their body language betrayed them: nervous hands, eyes darting, lips pursed, back in first class. The pregnant woman was now seated with her seat reclined slightly. She held her stomach like she was trying to calm something more than just a child inside. Marcus kept glancing toward her, hoping she'd look his way again, maybe give him a signal or a reason. But she didn't. Instead, Aaron Strickland stood. Again. This time, he slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out what looked like a small identification badge. He flashed it quickly to the flight attendant still manning the front of the plane. The moment she saw it, her face changed. She nodded, stepped aside, and disappeared behind the curtain. Then the intercom crackled again. But this time, it wasn't the voice of a flight attendant. It was Aaron. Attention passengers. I apologize for the disruption. I've taken temporary control of the cabin communications due to an ongoing security matter. Please remain seated. Do not attempt to record or transmit anything beyond this aircraft. You are safe. But I need your cooperation, a few passengers gasped. Someone dropped a water bottle. Marcus clutched his backpack tighter. Strickland continued. Certain events involving this flight have triggered national security protocols. You'll be briefed when we land. For now, I ask for silence and patience. And just like that, the speaker went dead. People began murmuring again, louder this time. A woman across the aisle asked loudly, "Who is that man? Why is he talking to us like this isn't just a flight?" A few rows behind Marcus, a man stood up and yelled, "This is ridiculous! You can't hijack the intercom." "I paid $800 for this ticket, I want answers." He barely finished his sentence before the same male flight attendant stepped quickly toward him and said firmly, "Sir, sit down." The man protested, but the attendant leaned in and whispered something into his ear. Whatever he said turned the man pale. Without another word, he sat back down. Marcus turned his face back to the window. Though the outside view showed nothing but a blurry tarmac and a crew vehicle frozen in place, his thoughts spun wildly. Who were these people? Why the note? Why him? And what was happening in the rest of the country? Were people talking about this already? What no one knew yet was that the airline's public relations team was scrambling. Within the 60-second window after the slap, reports had already reached the corporate offices. Strickland's name was enough to trigger panic, not because he was rich, but because of who owed him favors. Governors, intelligence directors, airport authorities. The CEO of the airline herself was in a closed-door meeting when she got the call. 9 airports, her assistant whispered, pale with shock. 9 of our busiest hubs just suspended us. No explanation. No appeal. Nothing. She turned slowly toward the screen where a paused video showed Monica, the flight attendant, mid-slap. Her hand raised, the passenger's stunned expression frozen in time. The image said everything. Meanwhile, back in the sky, Marcus finally opened his bag and pulled out a small composition notebook where he'd written his goals for the summer. At the top of the first page were the words, "Make a difference, stay invisible, don't get in trouble." Too late for that now. Suddenly, he heard a soft knock against the back of his seat. He turned. It was the woman from behind him, the one who had whispered earlier about Strickland. She slipped a folded piece of paper into his hand. She told me to give you this, the woman said softly, before sitting back. Marcus unfolded it slowly. Keep your hoodie on. If anyone asks, tell them you work in digital systems. Don't talk, don't run. The storm is already here. His heart pounded. Harder. Digital systems? He didn't even have a tech background, not really. But maybe that's what they were using him for. Maybe this was all a cover, but for what? He looked back at the pregnant woman again. She was resting, eyes closed, breathing slow. Then suddenly, her hand reached under the seat. She pulled out something, just for a second, and quickly slid it into her carry dash on. Marcus caught a glimpse. It looked like a small metallic box, smooth edges. No branding, no label. Just clean, military-looking metal. Was it a device? A tracker? Or worse? And then something unexpected happened. The cabin lights flickered, not just dimmed, flickered like they were struggling against some unseen force. Then the power went out entirely. For 3 seconds, there was nothing but darkness. And in that darkness, a voice whispered from the galley. She wasn't supposed to be on this flight. Then the lights came back on. And Monica, the flight attendant who had slapped Strickland, was standing in the aisle again. But this time, her uniform was torn slightly. Her lip was bleeding, and she was shaking. Eyes wide, hands trembling. She didn't say a word. She just looked straight at Marcus. Then she fainted. Gasps burst out across the cabin as Monica collapsed in the narrow aisle, her body slumping sideways between seats. A man in row 9 jumped up instinctively, kneeling beside her, checking her pulse. "She's breathing," he said shakily. "But she's freezing cold." The lights continued to flicker every few seconds, casting strange shadows on the ceiling panels. The hum of the engines was still silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the crying babies on board had gone still as if sensing something wasn't right. Marcus's chest tightened. His hands shook as he shoved the second note into his hoodie pocket, eyes darting between Monica, the passengers around him, and the pregnant woman who now sat motionless in her seat, calm, as if none of this touched her. The entire row in first class seemed frozen in time, like they were waiting for something to begin. Or end. Aaron Strickland had stood again, this time faster, more alert. He knelt briefly next to Monica, checked her wrist, then looked up at the flight crew member near the exit door. He made a slicing motion across his throat with one finger silent but deadly clear. Shut it down. A second later, the remaining crew disappeared behind the galley curtain, one of them locking the door behind them. From somewhere behind the curtain came the sound of a small latch being opened. Followed by a hiss-like pressurized air releasing, the cabin dropped into eerie silence again. Marcus tried to breathe steady, but it was like the air was turning heavier with each passing second. He wasn't the only one. People began fidgeting in their seats, rubbing their arms. Looking toward the emergency exits, the older man beside Marcus leaned in and whispered, "They just activated the kill switch. If this goes sideways, we don't land." Marcus jerked his head to face him. "What are you talking about?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he pointed with his chin toward Monica's unconscious body. She wasn't acting on her own. That slap was a signal. This was planned, Marcus's mind spun. Nothing made sense anymore. The note, the metal device, the whispered orders, the blackout, and now Monica, lying unconscious in the middle of it all. If this was a setup, why was he caught in it? Then he remembered something, the woman. She had slipped that note into his pocket before anything even started. She had known this was going to happen. Marcus shifted in his seat, finally, mustering the courage to stand up slowly. No one stopped him. No one even noticed at first. He moved slowly toward the front, clutching the folded paper inside his hoodie. Eyes locked on the pregnant woman. She saw him coming and didn't flinch. Instead, she lifted the blanket on her lap, revealing a black tablet no bigger than a book. She tapped it once, and the screen flickered to life. Without looking up, she said quietly, "Sit." Marcus hesitated. She didn't sound afraid. She sounded like someone used to giving orders. He sat beside her in the now empty seat, the one he had offered her before boarding. She turned the tablet toward him. The screen showed a real-time map of all 9 major airports where the airline had been suspended. Each location blinked red dot, and under each one a single word, lockdown. "What is this?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman answered without looking at him. "It's a containment measure. You were part of the contingency plan. They just didn't tell you." His eyes widened. "Me? You're carrying something," she said, finally meeting his eyes. "Something they couldn't move through regular channels. You were meant to blend in." A smart kid from a small neighborhood, no records, no attention. Marcus felt his stomach drop. "I don't have anything." "Not knowingly," she said. "But your bag does." His heart pounded in his ears. He thought about the strange weight in his backpack, the one he'd felt at the airport, but brushed off as books shifting around. He had packed it himself, hadn't he? He wasn't so sure anymore. Before he could speak, the cockpit door clicked open, and for the first time since takeoff procedures began, the captain stepped into view. But he wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits followed behind him, faces blank, eyes scanning the cabin. One held a small case, handcuffed to his wrist. The other carried a clipboard and spoke directly to Strickland, who nodded once and pointed at Marcus. Passengers turned their heads. The tension snapped. One woman screamed, "What's happening?" "Why are they pointing at him?" Another man stood up, panicked. "I want off this flight." "Now?" The suit with the clipboard raised his hand, calm and steady. "Remain in your seats. We will be deboarding shortly, once primary extraction is complete." Marcus looked to the pregnant woman, confused and terrified. "Extraction?" She placed a hand on his arm, gentle but firm. "You're about to be taken to a secure location. Do not argue. Do not run. They will explain everything after." He couldn't believe it. He had just been trying to do a good deed, give up a seat, catch a flight, start a new chapter in his life. And now he was being pulled into something that felt larger than anything he had ever imagined. His voice cracked. "Who are you?" She paused. "An asset, same as you. The difference is, I was trained for this." Before Marcus could process that, the man with the handcuffed case approached him. "Marcus Carter?" he asked. He nodded, barely able to speak. The man unlocked the cuff, handed the case to Strickland, then motioned for Marcus to stand as he rose to his feet. The entire plane seemed to lean in, like the walls were holding their breath. Strickland took the case, opened it briefly to check the contents, then closed it with a click. The man in the suit leaned close to Marcus's ear and whispered, "This isn't about who you were, it's about what you're carrying. And who wants it bad enough to bring down an airline?" Marcus's knees went weak. He didn't even know what was in the bag, but whatever it was, it had just put him at the center of a national crisis, and the most terrifying part, the flight hadn't even taken off yet. Marcus could barely feel his feet as he followed the man in the suit down the narrow aisle, the entire cabin watching in stunned silence. His backpack felt heavier with every step, like the weight of the unknown inside it was now pressing down on his shoulders. The eyes of strangers burned into him, some full of confusion, others suspicion. A child in one of the front rows whispered, "Is he in trouble, Mommy?" The mother didn't answer. They reached the galley where the curtain had been pulled aside. The two men guiding him didn't force him, didn't raise their voices, but their silence was louder than shouting. Marcus passed by Monica again, still unconscious on the floor. Her breathing was shallow. A small medical kit had been opened next to her, but no one was tending to her now. It was like everyone had moved on before he could ask what was happening. Strickland handed the locked case to the second man and said, "Move now, the window's closing." But just as Marcus stepped toward the front exit door, a loud chime rang from the cockpit. A red light blinked on the wall above them. The pilot, still standing near the controls, looked at the panel and froze. "We've been locked in," he said grimly. "Ground has overridden manual access. We're not going anywhere." Strickland's face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something cold and calculating. He tapped his phone again, and a moment later, every phone in the cabin buzzed with a simultaneous alert. The passengers stared at their screens in confusion. Marcus checked his phone. It was a message from an unknown number. "Your flight has been compromised. Stay in your seat. Federal units en route." He turned to the man in the suit. "Compromised? What does that mean?" But before the man could respond, a deafening crack echoed through the fuselage. It didn't come from outside. It came from the cargo hold beneath them. The floor vibrated. Overhead bins rattled. Strickland stepped back sharply. "They're already inside." The man with the handcuffed briefcase dropped it and reached into his coat. Marcus instinctively ducked behind a wall panel, heart slamming before anyone could shout or move. The rear cabin door burst open, not from the outside, but from the inside service compartment. Two figures in dark civilian clothing stormed in, faces obscured by masks, each holding a suppressed weapon, scanning rapidly. "Clear," one of them barked. "Target is not secured." Passengers screamed. Someone tried to stand and was immediately shouted down. "Get down!" "Don't move." Strickland raised his hands, stepping between the agents and the rest of the cabin. "You're breaching a sealed security aircraft. Who sent you?" The lead intruder responded without hesitation. "Division 6, we're retrieving the payload." Marcus didn't understand what they meant, but then one of the masked figures pointed directly at him. "There, he has it." "No," the woman still sitting in Marcus's old seat stood up suddenly. Her voice was sharp, commanding. "You're not cleared." "He's not your jurisdiction." The masked figure stepped toward her. "Stand down, this is not your op." She didn't move. Her hand subtly reached into her coat. "Don't," Strickland warned, eyes darting, but the tension snapped. The masked intruder lunged toward Marcus. At the same time, the woman pulled something from her coated device no bigger than a card reader and slammed it against the wall panel near her seat. A high-pitched pulse shrieked through the cabin. Everyone covered their ears. Marcus felt his vision blur. The overhead lights cut out completely. In that chaos, someone screamed, "Gunfire!" "No, just shouting." Someone tackled someone else near the galley. The sound of fists. Then a thud when the lights flickered back on. One of the masked intruders was on the floor, groaning, his weapon gone. The second was missing. Strickland stood over the downed figure, breathing hard, his suit wrinkled, a scratch bleeding just under his eye. He looked furious. The woman was gone. So was Marcus's backpack. His heart stopped. She had taken it. Everything clicked at once. The seat swap. The note. The tablet. The warning. She had never needed help. She needed access. And Marcus had given it to her without realizing. Strickland grabbed Marcus by the shoulder. "Where is she?" "I don't know," Marcus shouted. "She was just here." Strickland turned to his team. "Seal every exit." "She's still on board." The man with the clipboard nodded and rushed down the aisle, barking orders. The unconscious flight attendant was dragged to the back, While the passengers were ordered back into their seats again, this time with force, the aircraft had turned into a prison. Marcus stared at the door she had vanished through, 1,000 thoughts crashing in his head. He didn't know her name. He didn't know what she had stolen. But he knew one thing: she had played everyone dead, and now the people hunting him were going after her, and whatever was in that backpack. It wasn't just dangerous, Dot, it was the reason an entire airline was collapsing, and she had just walked away with it. Asterisk moral of the story. Sometimes a small act of kindness like giving up your seat can place you at the center of something much bigger than yourself. But doing the right thing, even when you don't fully understand the consequences, is what sets real character apart. In a world full of secrets, deception, and power struggles, it's not strength or status that defines a person, it's integrity, courage, and the choices we make when no one expects anything from us. Share this story if you believe doing good still matters. Like, follow, and stay tuned for what happens next.